Well, the last couple of years I have been working for the archive of the Kounadis family in Greece. We are talking about the largest discographical archive in the country. Panagiotis Kounadis began collecting records as well as other extremely important historical material during the 1960s. The last few years, the archive began its digital life by creating the virtual museum of the Kounadis archive. The bilingual virtual museum, that is in Greek and in English, constitutes an approach to the phonograph era and 78 RPM discography from the perspective of modern digital applications. The archive contains more than 8,078 RPM records, 2,045 RPM records, 2,033 RPM records, and 3,000 CDs. The archive also contains more than 150 hours of interviews recordings with leading figures of folk popular music of the 20th century. Moreover, there are 2,400 commercial musical scores and approximately 4,000 pages of handwritten scores and libretti. One can also find approximately 2,000 historical postcards from 1895 to 1920, 60 historical devices of recorded sound reproduction, and 70 musical instruments. The Kounadis Archive Virtual Museum's collection, under the title Cosmopolitanism in Greek Historical Discography, created along with Leonardos Kounadis, the curator of the museum, constitutes a singular tool for examining and shedding light on issues concerning cultural interactions over a wide geographical area, offering access not only to audio but also to visual data. This area includes the following broad regions: Europe up to Caucasus, North Africa, the Middle East, and the United States of America. In a few cases, recordings have been found in Central and Southeast Asia and also in Central and South America. Crucial findings have resulted from this research regarding the relationships between various ethnic repertoires. More specifically, hundreds of musical tunes have been detected and documented, which were recorded in Greek historical discography. The very same tunes were found recorded also in other repertoires, in some cases earlier and in others later than the Greek recordings. In other words, we find the same song or instrumental piece recorded in 1910 in Constantinople, for example, by Greek speakers, in 1911 in Bucharest by Romanian speakers, in the same year in St. Petersburg by Russian speakers, etc. At the epicenter of this new virtual room lies the intertextuality which is observed in folk and popular repertoires of the 20th century. Moreover, issues such as the ever-changing fluidity during performance and the adoptions by musicians are critical in this research project. These repertoires and the musicians who carry them can be regarded as conduits in the uniquely diverse cultural heritage of this musical world. They borrowed and lent, but they also carried more distant traditions from the places where they had previously lived and the places in which they had traveled. The mutual influences are evident in performance practices, instrumentation, rhythm, harmonization, vocal placement, and in general the habits that each musician carries in him and her. Repertoires are deterritorialized and mixed with others, taking on supralocal characteristics. Musicians constituted key interlocutors within the borders of major multicultural empires and other smaller or larger political entities, and they composed a rich musical mosaic consisting of heterogeneous coexisting palimpsests. Our research led us to understand that the songs some people have been singing for years, celebrating and dancing to, and which have eventually become futures of their collective identities, are songs that played the exact same roles elsewhere on the planet. We also understand that not only are the circulation, interactions, and adoptions of this type not just isolated and transient phenomena, but on the contrary, they are their norm. The material offered in the room concerns three aspects. the sound of the Greek recording, the label of the historical record, and the documentation of the recorded work in the form of both an annotation text and a separate section which contains several fields. In the annotation text, one can learn about the historical period in which the piece was recorded, the protagonists, the performance practices, and of course find references to other ethnic recordings where the musical tune in question was identified. So one using the hyperlinks found in the text can be taken to another audio archive, a library, or collector's website and listen to the other recordings. As can be easily understood, countless sources of documentation were used, which one can find on the relevant page of the Kounadis Museum website. The Room of Cosmopolitanism has been seemingly built upon pairs, that is, relations of the Greek-speaking repertoire with some other ethnic repertoire. In the majority of cases, however, the relations do not concern only two repertoire categories. In other words, the network that is formed is much more complex. This has been and continues to be one of the most burning issues. We were in possession of the Greek records, and it was with them that we had to start and put at the center. But the results of our investigation indicate the need for something bigger, and obviously it is clear that there is not only one center. Even in cases where we have a composer and we know what the original work is, it was not recorded in his or her country, nor by artists from that country. Moreover, the route through which the song may have reached the Greek-speaking world or any other world may not have been that of a direct route, but after 1, 2, or 3 new recordings in other places and languages. Or, to make it even more complicated, the original recording never became a hit in the place where it was recorded, and in some cases has not even been located to this day. But the second or some subsequent recording became a big hit and continues to be part of the active repertoire performed in its new place. Our research has so far yielded the formation of 41 groups, that is 41 pairs of interactions, counting almost 600 documents in the Kounadis website. If we also count the items we have found on other websites and archives, one realizes that we are talking about thousands of historical documents. The vast majority of these are historical records, while some are historical commercial musical scores. Regarding some of the problems we face, I will focus on one, which is the issue of identifying ethnic groups with nation states. In fact, this was the reason why we chose not to show borders on our map, because we had to decide which borders to use. In the time span in which we traced recordings, that is from the beginning of discography to the beginning of World War II, borders are constantly changing, empires are being torn down, nation states are being born, etc. Instead of borders, we chose to depict only cities. In essence, when we say Greek, Italian, French repertoire, etc., we actually mean Greek-speaking, Italian-speaking, etc. Some of the more special categories concern the Jewish repertoire, in which we include Sephardic and Ashkenazi recordings, and depicted with a yellow circle with lines through it, in areas of the map that were centers with large Jewish community. There is also the Kurdish repertoire, but also the Armenian repertoire, much of which we find recorded in Constantinople, being still the capital of the Ottoman Empire. The core, not only of the Room of Cosmopolitanism, but also of the entire virtual museum, is the document, the item. As far as the discography is concerned, the page of each recording contains first the label of the record, below that a player for listening to part of the recording. I should note here that so far copyright-free recordings have been uploaded, and below the audio is the annotation text. To the right of the screen are the documentation fields containing data and metadata, such as the composer, lyricist, rhythm or dance, recording date, place of recording, instrumentation, etc. At the bottom of the document, we find the tags section, which are a tool for grouping documents on the website. We also come across items related and linked to the displayed item, and finally the section with suggested similar documents. Observing and analyzing the repertoire involved in all categories, we came to several conclusions. We can speak of two broad and open categories or types of relations. On the one hand, it seems that it is either the record companies or the networks of the publishing houses that trigger the movements of these musical tunes. For example, we speculate that local branches of companies send recordings made there to agents of the same company in another city. Something like this is also possible for publishing houses that printed commercial musical scores. There, in the new place, somehow the local musicians heard the records and the cover in their language was born. Even in these cases, however, it would be simplistic to talk about simple covers in another language. Local musicians often fully adopted the song, that is, they incorporated it into their active repertoire that they performed in cafes, restaurants, or nightclubs with new instrumentation and performance practices. However, quite often it seems that these dealings are also the product of more unmediated and gradual fermentations between the ethnic groups. For instance, in the large urban centers of the Ottoman Empire around the Mediterranean Sea, the conversations between the Greek-speaking Orthodox Christians, the Turkish-speaking Muslim co-tenants, the Catholic Greek speakers, the Armenians, the Sephardi and Ashkenazi Jews, the Levantine Protestants, and the Europeans and the Americans were more than intense. Very often, the scope of this network extends to Eastern and even to a part of Central Europe. Certain cities, such as Vienna, for example, play a critical role in tuning these networks. The relevant evidence demonstrates the musical exchanges between them and elucidate an ecumen where everyone contributed to the musical melting pot and where everyone may draw from it, as well as redeposit it in a new form with sometimes clear and sometimes blurred references to its pretext until someone else pulls it out again through the melting pot so that it becomes clear that there is no end in this recreational and dynamic process where fluidity prevails. I would like to play some examples, a tiny sample of our findings, and then perhaps discuss anything you might want to. We have this Greek recording made 1932. And we found out several recordings of this tune everywhere. And many other recordings. I shall play a little bit of the Neapolitan and Italian interactions. French. Yeah, German and Austrian.
Λοιπόν να τον προσέχεις μυστικά τα
Spanish.
πια καμάρι να στολίζε.
We are talking about 100 of such cases. I can be a very good DJ, but I will stop here. Thanks very much for listening.